All right, welcome back to the channel. So Eddie Reynoso, Canelo Alvarez trainer, gives his 2 cents about the Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford fight, and he says that he thinks Terence Crawford is the better fighter with more skills and more talent. Personally, I think that's kind of a, self-serving answer. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So in the news lately, there has been a lot of talk about Terence Crawford and what Terence Crawford said about Canelo Alvarez, that Canelo Alvarez is shying, or it appears that Canelo Alvarez is shying away from black fighters. There's been a lot of backlash in the media because he said what he believes, and quite honestly, is very reasonable conclusion to draw, since at 160 pounds and at 168 pounds, he ain't fighting none. Everybody that he fought was back when he was fighting his way up and fighting on the PBC card, fighting basically on the undercards or closely associated with the PBC. Ever since he went over there to HBO, left Showtime, went to HBO, that was it. Left Showtime, went to the Zone, yeah, that was it. No more of that stuff. So, he has his critiques. However, and I could see, how that might upset somebody like Eddie Reynoso, who is the trainer of Canelo Alvarez. But when Eddie Reynoso was asked who he thought was the better fighter between Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford, he said he believed it was Terence Crawford. And strangely enough, he gave credit to Terence Crawford in the same way that Errol Spence Jr.'s trainer Derrick James gave Terence Crawford credit. So it was really, really interesting listening to to the fact that both Derrick James and Eddie Reynoso had the same analysis of Terence Crawford and what his strengths were. Now, Derrick James has a little more, obviously has a different opinion about Errol Spence Jr., but they were very, very similar, right? What Eddie Reynoso said was that he believed that Terence Crawford was a better fighter than Errol Spence because he was more athletic, right? In my words, there's a translation there, but also that he's more versatile, that he's obviously more experienced. I wouldn't say obvious, but he's more experienced, right? So the more athletic part, that is something that people consistently say about Terence Crawford and Errol Spence. And it is something that Derrick James said that he really thought was outstanding about Terence Crawford. He said that Terence Crawford is just an amazing athlete. There's things that he can do in the ring because of his athleticism that other people just cannot do. So the biggest strength that Derrick James, the trainer of Errol Spence Jr., gave to Terence Crawford, said was his athleticism. And also, obviously, his versatility, the ability that Terence Crawford has to fight in what appears to be several different styles. Having watched Terence Crawford enough, I think that at least in his past fights, I can pick a pattern. And he goes from being, there's almost like two completely different Terence Crawfords in the ring when you're fighting. When he's an orthodox fighter, he's being aggressive. He's going, he's taking it to you. If he has any issue with fighting somebody from the orthodox stance, he will then switch to the southpaw stance and he will go more defensively, but with an eye at at changing quickly from defensive position to an offensive position, right? So that's kind of how you see the two Terence Crawfords. And I think a lot of times he befuddles people with those switches, because when he switches to southpaw and it becomes defensive, now an orthodox fighter is fighting a southpaw fighter, and a guy that's fighting defensively in the southpaw stance, but yet still has his big hand in front of him, right? So that is kind of the thing that you see, I think, style-wise and versatility-wise, that you see in Terence Crawford. Now, as far as what he said about, Eddie Reynoso said about Canelo, right? I think that is a little bit self-serving, because Terence Crawford is never going to ever fight Canelo Alvarez. The weight is different, right? Because you have Terence Crawford, who began his career at 135 pounds, then moved to 140, then moved to 147. If Terence Crawford goes to 154. That's about it. But he's definitely a smaller guy than Errol Spence Jr. He's just not as big and doesn't have, as much room to move up. Also, Terence Crawford is not actively looking for a Canelo Alvarez fight when Errol Spence Jr. has mentioned several times that he wants the Canelo Alvarez fight. Now, strangely enough, and this isn't often mentioned with along with Terence Crawford's criticism of Canelo Alvarez, that he seems to be shying away from black fighters. Well, if you look at who the biggest fights for Canelo Alvarez is, in the biggest money fight in boxing for Canelo Alvarez, those consist of fights with two black fighters. One is Jermall Charlo, and we've already talked at length about how he didn't fight Jermall Charlo at 154. He didn't fight him at 160. When Jermall Charlo gets to 168, more than likely he's not going to fight him at 168 either, right? He's going to fight Yaldemir. I can't believe Mike Coppinger even could get out of his mouth a defense for this. The guy's going to fight. Well, who did he fight? Rocky Fielding, Liam Smith, Yaldemir, Billy Joe Saunders, and he's gonna wrap it up with Caleb Plant. I mean, come on, man. How much more obvious can you get? But anyway, he doesn't sound too, excited about a fight with Errol Spence. Errol Spence Jr. is without a doubt, dude, the biggest fight that he can get. But regardless, as far as the analysis of who's going to win between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., look, Derrick James said it best, and where he was like, look, man, Terence Crawford is a tremendous athlete. However, he makes a lot of mistakes because he relies on his athleticism. And you see that. That's why he gets clipped by Yuriorkis Gamboa. That's why he got clipped by Egis Kalvanakis. That's why, he didn't get clipped because there was not much left of Kell Brook at the time. But Kell Brook touched him a little bit of something. Because because of his athleticism, he's going to show some breaks in fundamentals. The problem when he fights Errol Spence Jr. is this, that Errol Spence Jr. is just as good an athlete as him. However, his athleticism is focused in a very fundamentally sound way. He is not going to give Terence Crawford the time. He's not going to give him the time to figure him out. You know what I'm saying? He's not going to give him, there's not going to be 2 rounds of, let me see how you're going to react. Errol Spence Jr. is going to go right at him with that jab, with the right jab up top, the right jab with the straight left hand down to the stomach. He's going to be aggressively attacking him, trying to cut it off. His defense is going to be very, very tight, and there's going to be a lot of punches thrown in that fight the entire time that fight is going on. That is an amount of pressure that Terence Crawford's athleticism is not going to get him out of, because he's not so much more athletic than Errol Spence that Errol Spence can't adjust for it. And you've already seen Errol Spence against, I believe, a guy as athletically gifted, definitely in his feet, in Sean Porter, and was able to overcome that. But, hopefully we'll get to see this fight. I like the clarity in Eddie Reynoso's mind, but at the same time, man, come on, man, let's make the fight. Anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think, and with that, I'm out. Peace.